Selective.
So we're actually in the middle of a section here. I forgot which page number we're on. I think 150, is it? 150? That sounds about right. We're about to start the debate Yosef, I think, about, well, yeah, 155, on page 155. So in book 11, page 155 here, you want to borrow, I'm following on the screen, so you can take one. Okay, let me just get my screen. Sorry, they leaked through. Did you wait too long?
Yeah. So that last one.
Okay, so we were discussing whether or not you can basically daven loudly for tefillah, right? And we said there's really two minhagim. We said that the sort of the real practice is that you don't you have to daven that you're supposed to, temporary practice that you have to daven loud enough that you can hear it, but other people shouldn't hear you. But then we saw that there was the minhag in the Zohar, certain Kabbalistic poskim who say that you shouldn't be making it even loud, that you should move your lips, but you shouldn't make any noise at all. The contemporary non-Kabbalistic practice is that you should be davening so that you hear it. You should hear yourself saying Amida, but other people shouldn't hear you. And then we saw, we're about to start this Beit Yosef here on page 155, where there's this interesting practice that some places people would daven more loudly on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. They wouldn't whisper to themselves, but they'd daven more loudly. And where does that come from? Because one thing we were agreed on last time is that you should not be davening so loudly that you're disturbing other people. So why is it everything went out the window on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? So that's what we're going to start looking at here in source 28. The Bet Yosef discusses this, and we're going to look at different sort of explanations to where this custom comes from and maybe justify it. So in source 28 says the Bet Yosef, "Rosh Hashanah v'Yom Kippurim nohagim ha'olam lehashmiya kolam b'tfilatam." On Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, the minhag of the world is to make their voices audible during the tefillah. And he says there in the bold, "Hu tmiha leads." It's astonishing to me. Tuva, incredibly. How did this custom become widespread? When I was younger, basically, I saw the Seif HaPliya, Shahaya Koret Hagar al Minhag Zeh. He would basically call Chayrem on such a minhag. He would heavily criticize his minhag to daven loudly. V'achar kach matzati bepiskei hatosfot shel Rosh Hashanah, but also in the Piskei HaTosfot, at the end of Rosh Hashanah, v'zeh l'shonot. Tosfot say as follows: Brachot de Rosh Hashanah mitoch she'ein ragilim bahem. Since people don't know them so well, the Amid of Rosh Hashanah is long, really long. Because what do you do when you don't know something so well? Mashmi'im kolam, they say it more loudly. V'gam yesh behem brachot arukot, right? And they have long brachot, umat'eh echad et chavero, and when you say it out loud, it would confuse each other. Lefikach shaliach tzibur motzi tarabim dei chovatam. Therefore, the chazan is motzi everyone their obligation. So there are some places where the custom was that they would not recite this silent Amida on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, but rather the chazan would just recite it for everyone, because the Amida was just too long and too difficult, basically, for everyone to do it, especially if not everyone was literate. The reason, says the Bet Yosef, why they would say the Amida out loud is because they were less familiar with the text. It wasn't something they said 3 times a day, or something they said a couple of times a year. It says in the next paragraph a different reason. He says, it's possible to give another reason. You made tshuva. Dafka, because they're days of repentance, people raise their voice in order to have better kavana. In other words, that's the reason that people raise their voice. It's not because they are confused with the words, but it's an attempt to have more kavana. They daven a bit more loudly than they're typically used to. So that's really what we do. We're just on page what? Sorry, wrong book. Sorry, you're thinking it's been a long year. So anyway, okay, so we're just on page 155. So we're just discussing that there was this minhag that people would say that Amida loudly on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. So he explains at the end of this source here in the Bet Yosef, he explains that because it's days of tshuva, maybe that's why people say their tefillah more loudly on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, even though they're not supposed to, because of extra kavanah. But aiti de chavivi lehu, since the tefillah is dear to them, yahavi datayu, people give more concentration. Ve'einam matim zeh et zeh. They will not mislead each other or make each other lose their place, even though they're davening loudly. Because there are days of tshuva, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, if everyone's having extra kavanah and people are concentrating more. And as a result, there's less concern that if the person next to you is davening too loudly, that it will distract you because you're also trying extra hard to concentrate. And then the Bet Yosef says he found an earlier source for this minhag in the Mordechai, who gives a really, I think, quite compelling explanation as to why it is some communities allowed davening the Amida more loudly in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So he says after the bold there, after I wrote this, Matzati b'Mordechai, found in the commentary of the Mordechai, the Masechet Yoma, even though throughout the years we saw last week, you have to daven silently and quietly, like we learned in the 5th parak of Brachot, Mikra'ei de Chana, from the psukim of, remember, regarding Chana, that her voice will not be heard. Miyu, however, says the Mordechai, Rosh Hashanah v'Yom Kippurim, Omer b'Kol Ram. You could daven loudly in Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, Kadei sheyilamduhu zeh et zeh, in order to teach others how to daven basically properly. Ulahat ot, and the fact that you're worried that you're going to make other people lose their place, lo chashina, we're not concerned. Listen to this. Why? Kivan shemitzuyim biyadam machzorim utfilot. People have machzorim. They have sidurim, they have machzorim on Yom Noraim. You have to think that the norm was before printing that not everyone had a siddur. So you learned the Amida by heart and you recited it by heart. You didn't have a siddur in front of you. And if you didn't have a siddur in front of you, so as a result, if someone else was davening loudly next to you, you'd lose your place because you haven't got a siddur where you can sort of follow along. It's all you're saying in your head. On Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, it's a long davening. Everyone has a machzor. And since everyone has a machzor, even if you're following with your machzor, says the Mordechai. And as a result, if they're a bit more loud because they're having extra kavanah, because it's days of tshuva, days of awe, nonetheless, you're not going to lose your place because you're following along in your machzor. So that's really this idea that on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, that the concern for others' kavanah doesn't apply as much, is because everyone has a machzor. And this is actually followed lahalacha. We look in source 29, the Shulchan Aruch rules this way. Yesham, and there are those that say, Shebarosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, mutar lahashmiya kolam b'tefillah. Some people say you're allowed to daven more loudly on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, afilu b'tzibur, even if you're in public in a minyan. Haggah says the Ramah, v'chein nogin, and that's the minhag. So in Ashkenaz, that's the minhag. But nonetheless, yizaru shelo lahagbiya kolam yoter midai. You shouldn't make your voice too loud. But nonetheless, there's no issue of distracting other people by davening a bit more loudly in Yom Naraim. Again, the rationale was that everyone has a machzor, right? You have to have a machzor because you don't know the tefillah off by heart. And as a result, if your tefillah is a bit louder than normal, so it's okay. That's what the Ramah paskins. Nonetheless, some of the Achronim, if we look in the next source, the Mishnah Berurah quotes the Magen Avraham, says it's still best not to do this. Look, when's the one time you don't want to get in the broigus? It's Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. It's just not. It's just not worth it, right? Like for that. Sorry. Okay. Lovely. Okay. It depends. It depends who's the one who's doing the talking. So, okay. So source 30 says the Mishnah Berurah, "Afit lubat sibur, even in public, la'orer kavanah." Again, you daven loudly in order to have greater kavanah. We're not concerned that you're going to bother the congregation, because we said that everyone has a machzor on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. However, still says the Mishnah Berurah, "I'm Magen Avraham the Masik." Nonetheless, look at the Magen Avraham who concludes, "The yoter tov lehitpalel belachash im yachol lechaben." It's better to daven quietly if you can, if you're able to. So even though the Ramah allows it, and strictly there's what's allowed, nonetheless, the Achronim still say it's still best on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, as I said, not to try and get into a broigus. You pay a lot of money for your Beit Yehuda seat, and then the person next to you davens loudly the whole way through. It's like, it's not worth it. So you tell tov hitpalel balachashim yachol lechaben. That's what the Achronim bring, and the Mishnah Berurah brings that psak at the end. And the Alkut Yosef, Rav Yitzchak Yosef, encourages similarly that even though that the Shulchan Aruch brought this minhag, and we saw this precedent for it in the Mordechai, nonetheless, it's best to daven quietly, even on the Yom Naraim, because of machloket. And as I said, that's the one day you really don't want machloket, is Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So the source 31, let's see this inside. It says, Rav Yitzchak Yosef, communities. Communities where the chazan would daven loudly, because not everyone had a machzor, not everyone was fluent in the tefillah. They have what to rely on. You shouldn't forcibly cancel their minhag due to the machloket. Nonetheless, in kol hakahol yodim, if everyone in the shul has a machzor, but then they agree that it shouldn't just be the chazan saying it out loud. Let's say such that they'll fulfill their, according to the more accepted psak of the rabbis, that is blessed thing to do. So again, he also backs this idea that even on Yom Naraim, we should not necessarily cash in this theoretical heter to daven because it's machloket, if possible. Yes.
I think it's interesting that if they're now talking situations where everyone has a machzor, probably then the need for the shliach tzibur to repeat everything.
Well, we have to realize that even then they had a machzor on Yom Naraim, they still did chazar tashatz. So they still did the repetition, even though even then everyone had a machzor. Again, why? What is the point of chazar tashatz? So discussed. I mean, I think we're going to discuss it a bit further. But so that those who were illiterate, so even having a machzor wouldn't help. They didn't know how to daven. But it also has properties of the tefillah of the tzibur, as Rav Soloveitchik said. It's not just tefillah but tzibur; it's tefillah had tzibur. It's and in the repetition, in some way, is representative of the tefillah of the whole community. It's not just a repetition. So it does have other properties other than just tick the box for people who couldn't otherwise daven. I think we might talk about repetition soon. Okay. Okay. All right. By the way, one of the reasons that why don't we do repetition at Ma'ariv? So because Ma'ariv originally started out as a reshut, so they never, who opted to daven Ma'ariv. So as a result, they didn't need a chassid for Ma'ariv because it was reshut. It was originally an optional tefillah in the day, so they didn't need to have because the I guess the novices, illiterate people didn't daven Ma'ariv. So why did you need repetition? Anyway, so let's look at the next section. So we discussed basically davening and then one's voice. What about hefsek? Interruptions or walking around during davening and such. And when I say davening here, we mean the Shemona Esrei, of course, the Amida. So the Mishnah famously in the fifth parak of Brachot says here in source 32, Afilu hamelech shoel b'shlomo, right? Now we have a king again, apparently. So even if the king greets you in your tefillah, lo yeshivenu, you're not allowed to respond to him. But afilu nachash karuf al akevo lo yafsik. Even, right, as the Mishnah famously says, even if you've got a snake wrapped around one's heel, you're not allowed to interrupt with davening. Interesting. Gemara that discusses, we're talking about a non-poisonous snake, where your life's not at risk, but if it's a case of life-threatening, then that trumps everything.
What is wrong with interrupting these times?
Well, that means that everything you said until now is a hefsek, or is a brachot levatala, basically. That all the brachot you said until now
but
you've made brachot in vain. So, and also you're in. But if it's life-threatening, the Gemara there elaborates and says absolutely. We're talking here about an inconvenience. No, because you wasted all your brachot as a result. So the Yerushalmi that's what the Mishnah says. But the Gemara in the Yerushalmi in source 33 brings that there are cases where you do move around in tefillah. So the question is, how do we reconcile these two sources? Looking in source 33, the Talmud Yerushalmi says, Tani, it was taught, Haya omed umitpalel ba'asratia or ba'platia. Somebody was davening on the road or in a public sort of area. You got to move out the way if a donkey's coming down the road or a wagon, right? As long as one doesn't stop their davening. So you do move out the way. If there's something in a disturbance, you don't just stand in the way and get mowed down by the donkey or the wagon. So there are cases. So how do we sort of reconcile these sources? It's a bit difficult because the Shulchan Aruch seems to rule like both. If we look in source 34 and Aruch Chaim Siman Kuf Daled, in source 34 here, the Shulchan Aruch seems to rule like both. The question is, how do we sort of understand this? When is it that you can move in tefillah, or when is it not? What is considered disturbance which allows movement, and what is considered disturbance which doesn't allow movement? So it says the Shulchan Aruch in source 34, Hayamit Palel Baderech, you were davening on the road, Uba behema or karon connector, like the Yerushalmi, an animal or a wagon's coming towards him. Yatem in aderech v'lo yafsik. You should move off of the road, right? But you shouldn't interrupt your tefillah. You shouldn't stop. You should keep davening. But for any other matter, ein latzet mimakomo ad sheigmor tfilato. So if there's a wagon coming towards you, right, there's a car coming to you on the road, you move out the way, right? But for any other matter, you're not supposed to move until you finish your tefillah. Unless you're in basically the tachanunim, right, the supplications at the end of davening, right, after the first Yula, after the last bracha, when you're in Elokainet Tzur, basically. So answer number says, so this first little bit there in Sif Bet quite clearly says that you only move if there's like something coming to like mow you down, basically, like an animal or a wagon coming, but otherwise you wouldn't move. But then what happens when you look in Gimel? Then he brings the Mishnah. Even if a snake's wrapped around one's heel, lo yafsik, you should not interrupt. The Ramah there adds in the brackets, you are allowed to move to another place, that the nachash, the snake, falls off your leg. Akrav, if it's a scorpion, posek, then you do stop your tefillah. Why is a scorpion different? The fee, because shehu mu'ad yoter lehazik, because it's more likely to be damaging. In other words, I'm worried about a scorpion being poisonous, basically. But he says also, v'nachash nami, even when it comes to snake, like the conclusion of the Gemara, imra ashu kaus, there's an angry snake, umuchan lahazik, and it's going to damage you, posek, then you should stop. So the point is that if there's any sort of threat to your life, then you do obviously stop. So how exactly does this work? When is it that you can literally shake your leg and move? And when is it that you can move out of the way of the carriage? But when is it okay? When is it not okay? So the Mishnah Berurah here tries to discuss this sort of apparent contradiction and how it's reconciled in source 35 here. So the Mishnah Berurah there says, when is it that you can move? It's because halicha, walking, is not considered a hefsek. Walking is not really an interruption in the same way that speaking is. And therefore, when there's a certain need to walk, you're allowed to walk. But to talk, we wouldn't typically allow. And that's the difference. So let's see the Mishnah Berurah there in source 35. He says, Kol se'if hazeh, it's kol se'if, shemazkir hefsek, when it talks about making a hefsek with the snake and the scorpion, Mairi hakol al yedei dibur. This is all talking about you're not allowed to make an interruption with speech. Ava al yedei halicha mutar, but to walk, you walk away from the snake, that's okay. Shehalicha lo nikra hefsek, because walking is not considered interruption. For dafka hacha, but only here to it's for need, lahasir hanachash, to get rid of the snake. After talim damin astam lo yesakana, even we're talking about a non-poisonous snake where you're not going to be hurt, whatever the case is. Aval shalol tzarech, when there's no real need to move, mikre halicha gam kain ktsat hefsek. Then walking does constitute an interruption. Like in the previous seif about the carriage. So basically, whenever there's a need, some sort of need, then you're allowed to move. Can't talk, you're allowed to move. So you can move to get rid of the snake, you can move to get out of the way of a carriage, but if there's no need, then you're not allowed to just move stam in the middle of Amida. You're not allowed to what's called be oker raglav, to move one's legs, move one's position of the Amida. There are other examples of when is it that Chazan can or cannot move. So we said if there's any sort of need, like the snake or whatever, you're allowed to move, or the animal coming on the road, the carriage, the wagon. The Mishnah Berurah here discusses bowing down on Yom Kippur. Right? How do we bow down on Yom Kippur? So you've got to get down on your knees. Now the Chazan, it's his in the repetition, he's davening the Amida. So is the Chazan allowed to take a few steps back so that he has room to actually bow down in front of him? We just learned that only if there's tzorech and there's a need, you're allowed to move. So the Mishnah Berurah has issues with this. In source 36, he says, En letzet, he says, V'yesh lig'ar, b'chazanim, you've got to tell off or correct chazanim, she'okrimim komam, b'yom kippurim, who they move back from their spot on Yom Kippur, shemagiyim el v'anachnu korim, when they get to the bit where they have to kneel, with a Seder Avoda and also in the Avoda. K'de'ita b'siman tafresh aleph, that this idea that they're not supposed to move. It's unnecessary. They shouldn't be taking a step back in order to bow down. What should you do? Rather, you should move the stender out of the way. He says, "Ella ma minidim lo stender kanahug beino lateva." You have the stender there. Uva avoda, when it comes to the avoda, where everyone has to bow down, masalkin ashtender ve'ein seich la'akarak. You just move the stender to the side and bow forward. But you're not supposed to take a step back because you are got your feet together because you're doing the repetition.
In Amina, the other one as well, it's just the cousin is his feet together, but they basically jumps backwards or lifted backwards, so his feet are still together. But it's saying here that
The Mishnah Berurah seems to imply that if you can move the stender, like here in like Lady Hood it's fixed, but if you can move the stender, that's better.
start further back, move it back further before you start.
I mean, here there's like sticks out, so you can actually bend underneath it, but don't bang your head when you get back up there. But it's got like a shelf sticking out, right?
Yeah.
But
Sorry.
This stand is very, very hard to move. It's
like a wooden block. You guys have got a wooden block. It's like see Beit Hara representing tonight. I shouldn't keep using Beit Yehuda as an analogy. So get in trouble. Okay. All right. So he says that really you should move the stender out of the way rather than take a step back. But again, if your feet are together, maybe it's less of an issue. Others are less strict about this, by the way, because it's a need of tefillah. But he can bow, so if the stender is stuck, he has to take a step back. But if you hop, like contemporary is if you can't move the stender, then you hop back, right? You keep your feet together. But tachanunim, so he adds another case where you could move in the Amida. So we said that the supplications, the Elokai Netzor at the end of davening, which is sort of like an extra bit, an addendum, in Siftet, he says there, Da'az mutar, then it's allowed im ha'akir le'tzorach mitzvah k'tzat. If taking steps or moving yourself is a little bit for a mitzvah, kagon, such as Masha anu nogim b'shatz, should take acha chazara atfila oker raglav v'yoshev v'tachanum. What about the fact, if you ever know, like the chazan, where does the chazan stop? The repetition, Hamrechet Mo Yisrael Bashalom, and then right, theory, hopefully, and then he sits down for tachanun. How are you allowed to sit down for tachanun? He didn't take 3 steps back. He says you're allowed to because I'm talking about a mincha or even shacharit, right? A shacharit and mincha, right? You get to the end of the repetition, and then the chazan just goes and sits down, right? Or if on Monday and Thursday, today. But like he never takes 3 steps back. So how are you allowed to do that? You have to depart from the Shechina. The answer is it's allowed because it's Sorech Tefillah. It's a need of Tefillah. Tachanun, but in saying these applications where we put our arm down is a continuation. So he says, let's read that again. He says, immediately after the repetition, he moves his feet, but Yoshev sits down for Tachanun. Like the minhag, which is our minhag, where we sit down for Tachanun. And then also he goes up again, the Kriyat Torah for laning. Right, he goes, he takes the Sefer Torah around the whole shul, and then he goes up for the to the bima. When is it that you take 3 steps back? It's Kaddish Titkabel. That's when he takes it 3 steps back. So only then, 10 minutes later, does he take his 3 steps back. And in the meantime, he sat down, he stood up, he's taken the Sefer Torah around the whole shul, right? He said Chatzi Kaddish again. That's okay because it is L'tzorech Tefillah. And therefore, even though there's a gap between the Oseh Shalom you do in 10-15 minutes time, that's okay. Aval, after 3 dots, he says, Aval Shalol L'tzorech, but for no purpose whatsoever, Asur Leha Adam Lazuz Mimkomo Ad Sheyifseh Gimel Psiot. But otherwise, if there's no need, it's not relevant to anything, then you would not, in theory, be allowed to take 3 steps to move until you've taken 3 steps back. So the answer to this basically is that you don't have to. Some people, after the repetition, they take time to take 3 steps back. You don't have to, because we rely on the 3 steps back that you take at the end of Kaddish Tikabel, even if it's 15 minutes later on a laning day. Oh, so that's when it's really a question. So if there's a change, then maybe you should take 3 steps back, because if you're going to be changing of the guard, then you yourself will never do 3 steps back. So maybe then. But if, let's say, you're davening on Shabbat or something, there's not going to be a change in the guard, then there'd be no need to take 3 steps back, because you're going to take 3 steps back at the end of the long Kaddish.
One of the problems is with what do you call it? Birkat HaKohanim. And if you haven't planned it properly, the Shliach Tzibur could be standing too far forward.
So then he doesn't move. He doesn't move for Birkat HaKohanim typically. I've seen someone do it before, but typically we don't move. Right. We should try and he should be positioned that he's at least in front. Right, we try and plan it. At least he's in front at least of some of the Kohanim he's behind. He should be at least behind some of the Kohanim, ideally. Yeah. Let's have a look at a couple of other examples. Source study 7, Isha Yisrael. So we've seen a couple of examples. The question of the Yom Kippur when he kneels, really he shouldn't move if he could just move the Stender. And then we saw that this whole minhag that he only takes 3 steps back in the Kaddish Shalet, but as Bruce correctly pointed out, we kind of that assumes it's going to be the same chazan. If we have switching of chazanim, then maybe you should take 3 steps back, but it's a different discussion. But it's also saying that Isha Yisrael brings other examples when you can move, even though you haven't yet taken 3 steps back. Im omer b'tfilat shmoneh esrei, v'yesh chashash sakanat lefashot lahamshich להתפלל באותו מקום. If suddenly there's a threat or a chance of danger to continue davening in that location, like a dangerous animal, like a scorpion that's coming towards him, kelef shoteh, a mad dog, hopefully not in the shul, but whatever, you're on a teal or you're on B'nai camp, or sheshameh yuriot, hopefully also not, that you hear shots, right? Or not these type, shots from a gun, right? Or azaka, right? Or you hear a siren. Unfortunately, very practical in Israel. Every kid needs to learn what to do when you're in the Amida and the azaka goes off. But tzarich larutz lamiklat, you have to run to. You run to a shelter. So what do? You cut. He says in any case you have to hurry up. You cut tefillah. You should shorten your tefillah. The hainu that is yom matchilat kol bracha v'sofa. You just say the beginning and end of each bracha. Or ya'avar l'makam acher. Or, and I think this is more the practice, you silently, without interrupting, go. You move to the other place. You carry on davening there. So, like I remember in like I said, during Israel there were several operations and unfortunately many azakot. Now what happened? Shacharit, the azakah would go off in the middle of Amida. We're all silent. We don't say anything. We all went down to the bomb shelter and then we carried on and finished off the Amida there. It's very surreal thing to do. Yeah. But you shouldn't interrupt speech. Unless it's absolutely necessary, because for that matter, like you've got to give safety instructions or the like. But you go down and then you continue to tefillah once you're in a safe place. He continues, if it's not a life-threatening scenario, But just due to fear, one can't daven properly, but in that place. I said, I would say going through, transferring through Dubai airport, but I said now I feel more comfortable walking around in a kippah in Dubai than I do in London, where I grew up. It's kind of sad. I was lamenting that I don't mind putting tefillin on I feel more nervous about putting tefillin on in Heathrow Airport than I do in Dubai International. It's sad, but let's say somebody felt like uncomfortable, then yachol la'avor, or started to feel uncomfortable where they were already started davening. Yachol la'avor l'makom acher lahamshich b'tfilah. So you can move amida, you can move to another place to finish your tefillah. Ach asur lo lahafsik b'dibur, but you're not allowed to interrupt again with speech. Daled ve'im kashe yamshich b'tfilah yela rak hefsed kaspi. But if it was only just going to cause a financial loss, then he says asur lo lahafsik b'emsa tefillah. If you're going to lose money, then that's not ample grounds to interrupt your tefillah. So we see if there's a need, there's any sort of threat or any sort of pachad, fear, then you can move. Halich, walking is not an issue, and we allow it in certain cases. But speech we would only allow in a case of pikuach nefesh. Okay, so it's life-threatening. And Mordechai Eliyahu also talks about what happens if sometimes a shul, you're davening and then the stender or somebody's stender falls off, somebody's siddur falls off the stender onto the floor. Am I allowed to interrupt my tefillah to pick it up? So he says, if it disturbs your kavanah, then you should stop your davening, and if it's bothering you, go and pick it up. Says Rav Mordechai Eliyahu here in Source 38. If you're in the Amida, you're davening from the siddur, and it falls out of your hand, or another sefer falls off onto the floor, because of this you can't have kavanah, it's bothering you. At the end of your bracha, when you finish the bracha you're in, you're allowed to stop, go and pick up the book, and then continue where you were. So again, English is impacting your kavana is also grounds for interrupting the Amida.
It also affects everybody else around you because they're all watching, waiting for someone to pick up them.
It's like the phone which is going. It's whenever the chazan's left his phone. It's classic. Textbook, right? Yeah. The chazan has gone up, but he's left his phone on ring at his original seat, and everyone's like looking, whose phone is it? And we all know it's the chazan's phone. It's like, one of you should go and turn it off. Okay, he's not going to go do it. He doesn't realize it's his phone. You've got to go do it, right? Same thing. Okay, classic. That's like a classic case. Never go up to be shliach tzibur and leave your phone on the stender. Never ends well. You're guaranteed to get a call if you do that. Okay. What about just pausing without moving or without speaking? Is there ever a time where you're just certain cases which would warrant or require just stopping, being silent for a few seconds and then continuing? So here, Rav Yitzchak Yosef brings somebody who's losing their kavanah. It's allowed to stop and try and recollect their thoughts and then continue the bracha. They're not walking, they're not talking, they're just stopping where they are. And therefore he gives that. I'm not going to read it inside, but that's in source 39 here. I've just got an eye on the time. But in source 39, Rav Yitzchak Yosef basically says that you can lenient, just read the bold if you want. You can gather your thoughts again and then continue to pray. So there are cases where you're not walking or talking, you just want to stop to collect your thoughts. That would be an appropriate, probably desirous thing to do during tefillah. What about hand gestures? What's the deal with hand gestures? Are you allowed to make hand gestures during tefillah? So you can't walk, you can't talk unless there's great need. What about hand gestures? The Mishnah Berurah says that that's typically also an issue of hefsek, even though you're not talking. The Gemara talks about people who are clicking makritz. The Gemara talks about somebody who's clicking, telling the chazan, whatever, and that might be an issue. Never here, right? Never here. And sorry. Here they don't do the gestures; they just say outright, start. So the question is that not really? It's only allowed in certain cases. So the Mishnah Berurah sort of explains for us what the criteria are in source 40. It says the Mishnah Berurah, "Lo yafsik," you should not interrupt. But afilu ramiza ba'alma, even through hinting, like motioning, asur is prohibited. Unless it's for like a child who's crying, you're trying to comfort the child because they're disturbing the whole shul. Then you can sort of make signs with the hand. You're trying and silence the child. And you shouldn't bother. So you shouldn't bother him in his tefillah. And if this doesn't help, you can actually get up and move to a place where you're less being disturbed. Below yudaber imo, but without speaking. V'chen, and similarly, Adam nichbad she'omed b'tefillah. Somebody, let's say they're waiting for the rabbi to finish davening. V'hashatz mamtin alav, and the chazan is waiting for him to finish. Amirat kaddish or kedusha. Who eno marutze b'kach, and the rabbi or whoever is not happy that the whole shul he can hear. Never happened here, but he's up there on a Friday night and he can hear the whole shul is talking, and it's bothering him that everyone's waiting for him. She'amtinu alav, he's not happy that everyone's waiting for him. But then matridaton, it's bothering him. It's tefillah. It's impacting his kavanah because he knows that everyone's waiting for him and he doesn't want to rush. Then mutter lo lirmos l'shliach tzibshit palakadalka. He's allowed to turn to and gesture to the chazan to start the repetition or to start the rest of the davening already. Because again, what is the criteria? It's because it's impacting his tefillah. It's impacting his own ability to concentrate because it's bothering him that everyone's waiting for him and he's rushing. So, okay. So that's a little bit about the sort of the summaries and the basic cases. That speaking is only allowed in case of koach nefesh. Walking is allowed when there's a certain sorech, a certain need, and the same thing is true about any sort of hand gestures. Only if there's a great need, if it's a need that's impacting my tefillah. If it's impacting my tefillah, then I could do hand gestures to sort of help my concentration, whether it's telling a child to be quiet or indicating to them the shliach tzibur not to wait for you and the like. Now it brings here what's called a section, women and interruptions. Women and interruptions in Shmoneh Esrei. I would argue the same for anyone, not just women, but let's read it inside, that the criteria are the same for women and men regarding interruption, but I presume this was just a piece that they wanted to bring in Rav Malame's book, which is about Tfilat Nashim, and therefore they call this section women, but it would be the same that if any man is in this predicament holding a child or the like, it would be exactly the same halachot. So let's have a read inside of some of the 8 sots he gives for, but this is specifically about women, but it would apply to men as well. Source 41 says, Pnini halacha, Rav Malamed, Isha she'amdal hitpalel, a woman who's standing up to daven, v'ne'amdu b'kirvata anashim or yeladim shenabrim ad she'eina yochal lekaven. People are talking around her, so she can't concentrate anymore. Im tuchal lemos lehem v'hem yishtaklu, if she can gesture to them so they should be quiet, mutar shetir mos. It's better that the first criteria, the first priority is that she should make a hand gesture, a nice hand gesture to them, I should say, that they should be quiet. Because making some sort of indication with your hand is the lightest of all of the hefseks, of all of the interruptions. If this doesn't help, she can actually move to another place with tamshich palel and daven elsewhere. And similarly, so a woman davening in the women's section, sorry. And she's got a child with her. The child starts making noise in the middle of the Amidah. And it's disturbing her kavana or other people's kavana. She can, the first priority, the first call of order would be that she should hint to the child that the child should go out. If he doesn't understand, then she can actually take him out the shul without talking, and she'll continue her Amidah outside the shul. Again, this would apply for men who've got a kid in shul. If the kid, they can send the kid out by hinting at hand, that's first. If that's not going to help or it's too young a kid, then take the child and leave and finish davening outside. And if there's some issue in her house and she's davening at home, said, it's going to cause loss. She's davening and she can smell that the cooking, that the food's burning in the oven, and she can smell it, and she's already started her Amidah. Lo tafsik. If as long as it's not going to cause a fire, it's just that the food's going to get burnt. Lo tafsik. She's not allowed to stop her Amidah. Same way that we said before that monetary loss is not grounds to stop your Amidah. So if she's davening at home and she can see something's going wrong in the house, she's not allowed to stop as long as no one's in danger. But if it's going to bother her kavana, she won't be able to concentrate. Then then she's allowed to go. So if she's very worried about it,
you know, there's gonna be a lot involved. If the meat-
Define the hefset.
This is if the meal is ruined, then they can't afford the meal for the
Would
dinner
you
is
say,
ruined.
I'm very sorry, King Charles, but I forgot to turn the oven off. I'll be back in 5 minutes. No. So why should you do that to the Melech Malchei Amlachim? Well,
Yeah, in such a way, they're not there for-
that's so nowadays, yeah. Yeah. So he's talking about a theoretical woman where it's not going to ruin her kavana, but if it's going to bother her so much, she's going to ruin her kavana, then he says you should do it. In theory, there's somebody in between. But you're right. If it's going to bother her kavana, then she's allowed to do it. Right.
If that doesn't worry her, she can't stop the interrupted Shemona Esrei. If the loss is going to mean she loses her kavana, then she can interrupt.
Yes. Yeah, we said the guiding principle, if it's going to really impact your kavana, that's like the guiding principle as to what allows a hefset. And again, the hefset without talking. She runs to turn off the oven or whatever it is to lock. She forgot to lock the back door. She locks the back door, whatever it is. I think I would resume where I am if I'm able to. If you're able to daven, like it's a place which is conducive to daven. Yes, minimize interruption. Right. Okay, so let's look at the next paragraph. There's some other examples of interruptions which are relevant in general. Telephone. Right. During your davening, they're ringing your phone. Tamshich mitfilat, she should continue her davening. Sorry, what was it? Yeah. But if it's really bothering her, talking, let's say, about a phone, she left her phone somewhere else, or she talking about the house phone, then take it to telephone. She can go and pick the phone and put it back down again. Go back to davening. She's davening and people are knocking on the front door. If she can ignore it, and it's the knocking and the ringing the bell, not incessantly is not bothering her. She carry on davening. If she can't get over it, it's bothering her. And if she's worried that maybe it's something urgent, then that person will leave. That package has been waiting for weeks, and she's going to have to be redelivered. And maybe it's something urgent, but it's really bothering. Get that. She can't have proper kavana. Then then she'd only then will she be allowed to open the door and to sort of hint with her hands, but she can't answer right now. The good old Jewish, It is a helmet odd, and be careful that what's the rule? Speech is out. Speech is not allowed. Yeah. Okay, so that was just some other examples which he brought in halachot pertaining to women. So the exact same halachot, if men were in those predicaments, it would apply to men exactly. There's no difference in men and women in terms of these halachot. Just that I suppose he was assuming that women would be davening at home more than men, and that's why they were brought there. Okay. What about walking in front of somebody davening? So we'll see how much we get through of this today. Are you allowed to walk in front of somebody davening? Somebody's taking forever, or you have to take 3 steps back and someone behind you still davening. What are the criteria for that? So we'll start this and see how far we get through. So look at this Gemara Masechet Brachot in source 42. Chana, when she comes to Eli and she gives back Shmuel after she finally has Shmuel, and she says, "I'm the woman." She reminds him, "I was the woman standing here with you, here on this spot, davening." Says the Gemara, "Am Rabbi Shua ben Levi mikan." From here we learn that it's prohibited to stand within 4 amot of someone else davening. Now, how do we learn that from that pasuk? The pasuk just says, she says to Eli, "I'm the woman who's standing with you on this spot." It's not clear as to how we learn that from there. So the Rishonim discuss where do we learn this from. So Rashi, sorry, how much is that? Just under 2 meters. Just under 2 meters, a bit under 2 meters. Okay, so basically anyone in the row in front of you, or to the seat next to you, or behind you, right? So that's how we're going to work out what the parameters are. So firstly, how do we learn this from that pasuk? So Rashi in source 43, there Rashi there says, "And it said imcha," standing with you. Well, if the fact that she says to him standing with you, says Rashi, mashma afhu ima ba'amida. It implies that he was also standing, but he wasn't just sitting there while she was davening next to him. Like he was also standing because she was standing and davening. Tosfot understand differently. They say it says imcha. There's an additional hey, right? Imcha is usually without a hey at the end. So Tosfot says something quite funny. They say that the hey means it's implied that she was davening five. He was standing 5 amot away. He wasn't allowed to stand within 4 amot, but hey, 5 amot he was allowed. That's how Tosfot understand. So look at source 44. That's how Tosfot on that sugya explained. Imacha mashma betoch arba amot implies that within 4 amot you're not allowed to walk when someone else or sit when someone's davening. Mishum dichtiv imcha malei behei. It says imcha with an extra hey. Kolomar shelo haya yoshev toch arba amot shela ki b'chamishit. He wasn't sitting within 4 amot, but rather in the 5th.
So how far away the man is away from a woman?
Other side of the mechitza. It's the short answer.
You don't have a pizza, you-
Well, if it's a temporary minyan, you have to have some sort of separation, but not like a full
Yeah,
mechitza.
that woman before wasn't
Ah, so here you're right. The separation, like
at home.
it's best
But the man
separately,
was-
separately, but not.
Yeah.
I wouldn't put any sort of
No,
no,
just-
no, just separate. No, there's no bit of pizza in that case. But obviously it depends on who the man and who the woman is. If it's husband and wife, then you're going to be more relaxed than if it's like someone totally different. Okay.
no, that's right.
Oh, you're coming round? Okay. Okay. That's a good excuse to stop for leave Amida before. So that's Pekuach Nefesh for you. So okay.
Yeah, I wonder about that. Poses well.
Sorry. Okay. When is it that you're allowed to? Is there any cases you're allowed to continue sitting in front of somebody davening Amida? So Tosfot bringing the name of the Gaonim here over the page, source 45, that if you are learning in Kriyat, if you're davening Kriyat Shema, then maybe you are allowed to continue sitting next to somebody who's davening Amida. So it's source 45, Tosfot say, Mikam, or Pershut Shuvat Gaonim, the Gaonim explain, Dafka b'yoshev uvata, just when you're sitting idle. Aval im haya oset b'kriyat Shema v'rikoteh, if you're in Kriyat Shema v'chiyot sebehem and the like, afilu yoshev shakridami, even sitting would be allowed. Now we'll see in a minute that this is talking about sitting next to somebody. We're going to see that the parameters of sitting in front of somebody davening is much stricter. But if you're allowed to continue within 4 amot to sit next to somebody, if you're also davening, you're Shema and they're in Amida, that's okay. We're going to see in front it's more strict. So somebody who's sitting literally in front, but to the side for sure. If you're also in davening, Kriyat Shema, whatever it is, then that would not be an issue. What about Talmud Torah? What about if you're not davening, you're just learning? What's the deal with that? You're not davening, you're learning. Can you sit learning next to somebody who's davening Amida? Because you're not sitting idly, but you're also not davening. So the Torah says it seems to imply that you're not allowed to, because only tefillah are you like engaged in the same act of Yirat Shamayim. But if you're sitting and learning next to somebody in shul, it's disrespectful to be sitting there learning while they're standing and talking to God. What are you going to say?
Still connecting to God with learning.
But you're not talking to God, and therefore you haven't got the same mode, if you like, of Yirat Shamayim as somebody who's actually engaged in tefillah right now. So that's what the Torah explains. Let's just have a look at that inside. In source 46 says the Torah. But mashman divrei it applies from the words. She'im osek b'torah asul. If you're just learning, you're not allowed to sit next to someone davening within 4 amot. Shelo hiskiru ela kriyat shema b'rikotel. They said dafka kriyat shema and it's brachot. V'hachi mistaber. This is logical. Afal gav dechamira Torah mitzvila. Even though Torah is perhaps more important than tefillah in some ways. Shaharimish Torah ta'umanatah in a mafsik mela tefillah. People who are fully Torah don't even stop Torah for davening. Baha tefillah adifa. In this regard, tefillah is nonetheless better or more preferable. The reason you're not allowed to sit within 4 amot shel tefillah is because it doesn't look right. This guy is davening to God, and you're sitting there not being makabel al shemayim. Because you osek b'kriyat shema, and if the guy next to him is saying shema, asal lai high timer, that reason no longer applies because he's also davening to God. Aval im hu osek b'torah akati ita high time. But if you're sitting and learning, you're not being makabel al malchut shemaim at that moment. V'onil malmin lidon. We also learn from here. Shaharei Eli mistam elohei omed batel mitam Torah. Eli probably wasn't just sitting there watching Chana davening, right? Eli HaKohen was probably at least learning. But afilu hachi, even so, he still needed to stand. So Eli HaKohen had to stand. He probably wasn't just sitting there idly. He probably had some sort of blessed purpose, learning or otherwise, and still he had to stand. So we see that only if you're engaged in tefillah can you sit next to somebody who is in their Amida. But if you're learning, you maybe wouldn't. The Beit Yosef disagrees. It says even a person who's learning can sit next to, within 4 amot of somebody who's in the middle of their Amida. So the Beit Yosef disagrees with the Torah. Source 47 says the Beit Yosef, Yesh lidchut, we can refute this. They only said about somebody who's sitting silently. If you're sitting and learning, as you said, Jeff, it's still makaba al malchut shemaim. Why? The kivan, the mishi Torah tel omenato, ain't mafsik b'tal b'Torah letefila. Learning has that same sort of status as tefillah in this regard, and therefore he goes back and forth, but he allows it. He allows it. If you skip to the end, if you look at the bold at the end of that source, she'im hu osek b'divrei Torah, somebody who is in Torah learning, afal pi she'enam inyan letefila, the kriyat shema, even though it's not related to davening or kriyat shema, shapir dami is still okay. It is still allowed. And therefore, there's a machloket, there's a dispute as to what happens to somebody who's learning. The Shulchan Aruch brings both opinions in terms of studying Torah. And he also says that all of these exceptions don't apply, as I said, for somebody sitting right in front of the person davening. We're talking about somebody sitting next to. But even if you're in Kriyat Shema, you can't sit in front of somebody who's davening Amida. So let's have this look at this.
Why is sitting in front different?
So we're going to see the Mishnah Berurah brings 2 different reasons, which we'll see.
Why
But it's different because there's 2 reasons. One is because of concentration, because you're distracting the guy because you're in his field of vision, and you're right in front of him. And the second reason is that it's like you're being mafsik between him and God. So like, whereas here you're not, whereas here you are. So let's have a look inside at the Shulchan Aruch, source 48. He says, Asur leshet b'toch dad amot shemipalel. You're not allowed to sit within 4 amot of someone davening. Ben milafanav, ben mitzdadim, whether in front of him or next to him, as the Ramah, ben milacharav, or even behind him. Harchik dalad amot. You have to be 4 amot away. V'im osek b'dvarim shehem mitkunei hatfilah. But if it's related to tefillah, what you're doing is davening. Afilu b'peret ezel makom, even if you're just saying korbanot, eino tzachal harchik. That's allowed. You don't have to move. V'yesh matir b'osek b'torah. And as we saw, some allow, which was the Beit Yosef himself. He wrote the Beit Yosef, right? So those that allow osek b'torah, somebody who's learning, afal pi she'enem mitkunei tefillah, even though it's not part of davening. But he adds, the yesh misha omer, those that say, dahani mili minat tzad, that's only if you're next to someone davening amida. Aval kenegdo, but in front of him, afilu kamale einav asur. Even if he is very far in front of him, like not just right there, really in front of him, directly in front of him, it's prohibited. Afilu osek b'kriyat shema, even if you're davening shema. You're not supposed to pass in front of somebody or sit in front of somebody who is right in front of somebody who's davening. Are there any exceptions to this rule? Because this means what, between me and the wall, no one's allowed to pass? What are the exceptions to this rule?
What about the other person who's standing there?
Well, then he's not allowed. Well, if he started at the same time as you, he's all right, but he can't finish before you. He's not allowed to take 3 steps back until you finish. We're going to see a couple of exceptions to the rule. So if we look over the page, the Mishnah Berurah there gives the Chai Adam, who says that if there's a barrier, if there's 10 tfachim in between the 2 of you, then that would be okay. So let's say you've got high stenders, like 80 centimeters or 96 centimeters, depends how you work it out. Then that would maybe constitute a gap, which you'd allow in certain cases. So look at source 49, the Mishnah Berurah says, Katav Chai Adam Chai Adam writes, Im hamipalel omer betzad echad midavar shu kavua gavoa yud v'rachav dalad. If he's standing on one side of a wall which is 10 tfachim high and 4 tfachim wide, then you can sit on the other side. Because this 10 tfachim wall is a hefsek in between the 2 of you, it's a barrier. But to pass in front of him, Even a small barrier is not good enough. You need a full wall. Meaning, if you could sit there, but you couldn't walk across, because to walk across is to really distract the person or to disrespect, to cause lack of respect to walk across. So the small standards in shul, if they're 80 centimeters high and they're wide, then they'd be okay to take, to sit in front of somebody. But you wouldn't be allowed to walk in front of a standard like that, in front of somebody, because that to walk past might be an issue. So that's the question. And the similar question would be, what happens if you were already sitting down and the guy behind you started his Amida before you? Well, it's not your fault. He started and you were still sitting. So are you allowed to now get up? Or do you have to move? The guy was ahead of you at davening and he starts before you. So source 50, the Shulchan Aruch discusses this case. It says that strictly speaking, you don't have to get up. You were sitting first and he started his Amida behind you. So it says in source 50, the Shulchan Aruch, if somebody was already sitting there, and this guy came next to him, davened, you don't have to get up. He's the one who came and stood next to him. But the Ramah adds that in the brackets, but nonetheless, it's an act of piety to get up even in that case. Okay, Beseda. So you don't have to stand up. But the question is that always the rule? The Mishnah Berurah says no. The Mishnah Berurah says that is only when you're davening in a place which is not a makom tefillah, or you're davening on your own. But if you're davening in a place where there's a fixed minyan, then you should stop you should get up. If the guy behind you gets up, you should also get up. Because this is a makom tefillah. And this is where we're doing tefillah, and you should not be sitting while the guy next to you is standing. So look in source 51, the Mishnah Berurah says, but dafka b'beit, we're on page 166. But dafka b'beito, that's dafka in your house. Of the minyan kavu, in a fixed minyan, for koshke the beit knesset, all the more so in a shul. So you have to stand up if the guy behind you stands up before you to daven. This is a designated place for davening for all people. Even if everyone has a set seat, right? That they paid money for. You still have to be machmir. But somebody who's learning Torah would not have to be machmir in this regard. How much more so? Rav Shiur and Talmidim. If you have a Rav sitting learning with the students, and they're learning, and 10 people come in and start the minyan there, you don't have to get up because they're the ones who are coming into your space. And in that case, it wouldn't even be midat chasidut, a pious thing to have to stop. So if you're in a makom kavua, you should stand. If the guy behind you gets up to do tefillah, then you should also stand at the same time, because this is a shul and we're here for davening, and that's what he wants to do. Sorry, next to would be the same thing. But if you're in Kriyat Shema, then you don't have to stand. We said already. Well, you were listening. You heard that bit.
What about next to? What does that mean?
Next to, we said, if you're also in another part of davening, you don't have to stand. But if sorry, wait, Arba Amot, Arba Amot is just under 2 meters in each direction. So you shouldn't be sitting there while learning or just on your phone while someone's davening there. Unless if you're also davening, that's okay. That's a midah, yeah. Okay, and ironically, we have to stop here to daven. So we will pick things up next week. That's right.
165.
165.